Hello and welcome to Remember, the show all about histories, mysteries, and a magical singing desert full of demons.
I don't want to go to there.
Explain that with your science. I can explain it with science. It's wind flows through this part of the Dunhuang, China, these sand dunes, and the wind flows through and it makes the sand vibrate.
It can be explained through science, so take that, you magic nerds.
I don't think that means that there's no demons.
No, I don't think so either, but we don't need to get into my personal religious beliefs.
I am joined by the woman most likely to slowly warm to killing people in an elaborate revenge plot, Paula Deming.
Thank you.
My name, however, was lost in a Mongol raid, only to be rediscovered years later by a member of the British Museum gone rogue.
So your name was stolen.
It was repurposed.
And your name is? Lost to the annals of time. I'll call you Matthew Jude. How's that?
I like it.
Okay.
This week, Paula, is all about Marco Polo. And you, listener, or I guess, and viewer, whoever you are at home, or on a bus. Maybe you're enjoying this as a podcast. Or perhaps you're like myself, some sort of 3 a.m. YouTube goblin, partway down a rabbit hole gone awry after looking up recipes for key lime pie. You found yourself in a podcast about Marco Polo now. Settle in.
I need to know how, in the comments below, please let me know how you got from key lime pie to Marco Polo, okay?
Where did your rabbit hole start? And how the hell did you end up here? Settle in. It's going to be fun, all right? It's history, but, fun. That's the whole point of the show. Marco Polo was a 13th century Venetian merchant whose time management skills and judge of distance were terrible.
Hold up. I'm going to interrupt you right now. I thought Marco Polo was just a game you play in a swimming pool.
Well, actually, it's funny you should mention that because I looked this up and the polo of Marco Polo's name and the polo from Marco Polo the game kind of comes from the same thing because polo means, but it's phonetically starts with a B, so it's bolo. And yeah, it does have the same, it's a whole thing.
So are we going to talk about why we have a swimming pool game? Where you go, Marco Polo. I assume it's related to the man Marco Polo.
I don't think it really is. I think it's just a game that kids play in America when they're not doing what kids in other countries are doing, which is working hard.
I'm working hard, closing my eyes, trying to hear where people are in the pool.
Trying not to drown because the jocks are going to be jumping into the pool soon.
Yeah, trying to get this game done before Adult Swim is called.
Here comes the AV team. They're jumping in the pool. No, not with the wires. Marco Polo's stories to this day are highly controversial, with skeptics and believers closing ranks around him. On the one hand, there are the vivid and precise recountings of day-to-day life in the Mongolian-ruled Shangdu, but on the other hand, he was in his day best known for being the biggest teller of tall tales since Jimmy 14-inch Johnson.
I see what you did there with the whole name.
I was pleased with it, if I'm honest. Made me giggle. The 13th century was fairly awful, like pretty much all of history, but when looking through a list of key events, one word pops up more than any other around that time, and that's the Mongols. And without a deep dive into the Game of Thrones that was the creation of the Mongol Empire, one thing to take into account is that the Mongols simultaneously were fighting samurai and Teutonic knights.
Should we just pivot and do an episode about them?
It's very, very interesting, and there's a hardcore history, like 4-part thing about the Mongols, which I highly recommend. It's great.
Hey, stop listening to this podcast right now and instead go listen to Dan Carlin. Just everyone do yourself a favor.
It's 15 hours. It's very good, but you've got time to listen to this first. And this isn't even about the Mongols, really. It's about Marco Polo. So they took claim to China, creating the Yuan dynasty, and they were a special mix between benevolent leaders and ruthless rulers.
Just a special mix.
A coin flip between fair and fierce. And they struck fear into the hearts of those who they met and terror to the people who had merely just heard they were on their way.
So their reputation, are you saying their bark was worse than their bite?
No, it was not. It was just more terrifying to think the Mongols were on their way. When they got there, you didn't have time to be frightened because you were being
dead.
Killed. Yeah.
And that's what parents used to say to their kids. Now, you better eat all those peas on your dinner plate or the Mongols are going to come tonight.
I think he may have been abused. I just feel like that might be something we need to talk about.
I'm not saying that's what my parents said.
But that didn't stop the old Polo family or many others from venturing east in search of prosperity and opportunity. They were a nation like any other, whom trade and fortune was up for grabs. They made it easier. In fact, they had this thing, they created a special thing for traders called the Pax Mongolica. It was set up to inspire trade, elevating merchants to like a protected class in a nation, allowing the use of the Silk Road in what would have been described as a relatively safe kind of way.
So it was like a pin you would wear, and it's like like raiders would come up to you, and you'd be like, and they'd be like, oh, sorry. Is that like?
Well, it was more like at the time, if you were a trader, it was a rule of thumb that you want to be messed with. I mean, obviously they were messed with, because if they go missing completely, who's gonna know? It's, but there were other things that we'll come on to later which kind of provide that, a passport of sorts. So while that is all known, the inner workings of the empire, the man behind it, at this time that was Kubla Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, that was in many ways completely unknown to the West. While the life and times of Marco Polo's travels themselves are fascinating, his Book of the Marvels of the World was certainly a bestseller at the time, and that's before the printing press had made it to Europe. There are those that simply don't believe it was possible. His book starts before Marco was born. His father and uncle both set off east, actually. This quick trip started while Marco's mother, Anna, was pregnant. And to put it into context, they didn't return until Anna was dead and Marco was 15.
Oh my
as was the style at the time.
It's like, hey, honey, love ya. So excited for our baby on the way. Just gonna go on a walk to China real quick. Like, literally, like a walk to China. I'd be like, peace out.
Part of the things that were sailing, it's like, well, it took them 4 months to sail from Istanbul. Nothing was, unless it was literally down the road, nothing's
close by. Yeah, you're not just like taking a quick jaunt, Wow. Sorry, I can't get over the fact that she was pregnant, they left. When they came back, he was 15. I'd be like, you're not my dad.
The pair had, it seemed, his father and his uncle, after leaving Constantinople, where they had been doing business, reached the highest court of the Mongol Empire, spoken to the Khan himself, and returned, with orders from him to bring back 100 learned priests to explain Christianity to him. And if their explanation was satisfactory, they would perhaps convert.
That's appealing.
Pretty appealing,
I think that'd
right?
be appealing to 100 priests. Like, they're actually considering converting.
Sounds kind of like Kubla Khan wants to kill 100 priests.
Maybe that's what the priests thought too.
I tell you now, only 2 priests ended up going on the return journey.
It's like, that's one thing I did know about this. Is like, pretty sure 100 priests don't go.
Imagine coming across that, walking through the desert. So, what are you guys doing? It's like, well, we can't really fend for ourselves. We're 100 learned priests.
We're an entire party of squishy mages.
Like, did you bring any warriors with you? Did you got a
we
druid?
have no tanks.
No, 100 clerics. So this travel back is made possible with the aid of the Khan's courier tablets, essentially a solid gold passport that ensured that they were under the orders of the Khan and not to be brutally murdered and robbed, I suppose. And now we do know that this Piazza tablet looked like. We know what it said, and so did Marco Polo, which is an interesting fact because Polo knew what these looked like, knew what they said, and he described them perfectly. Did he actually see his fathers, or were they merely described to him by a traveller in Constantinople? We don't know, but these tablets were later recorded in his uncle's will left to Marco and in Marco's daughter's dowry. So there were, somewhere in the Polo's possession, some gold tablets at the very least, which is tantalizing evidence that he had them.
Yeah, I feel like, why would it be in your daughter's dowry if you didn't actually have them? Like, that doesn't make actually a lot of sense. You wouldn't put something made up in a dowry record, I don't think.
I really want to bring to you the main for and againsts of Marco Polo's recountment and the stories himself, because it really is all very incredible. But One thing that is important is that it's not without precedent. There were at least 30 other Westerners at the time who made the journey to the Khan's empire. There are gravestones in China from that time for other Venetians. So that much is true.
So it is possible that this trip can happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely possible. And it's because the journey is possible that it means that there were really people that Marco Polo could have plagiarized.
Oh, well, so this is tricky because like this journey was possible. And so the people who are like, yeah, so obviously Marco Polo did it because it was possible. And then the exact opposite side can use the same bit of evidence as the argument for them, saying, or he just talked to some people who did it and then claimed he did it. So everyone wants to use it as proof for themselves, probably.
This is going to go back and forth a few times because the thing is that Marco Polo's descriptions were often the best ones. Paper money is a great example, something that hadn't made it to the West yet. And while, yes, it was something others may know about, even though the concept was crazy, Marco goes on to describe the denominations, the tax added when exchanging old worn-out notes, the specific mulberry fibers that were used to make the banknotes, which we now know is absolutely true. These were the things that we get first from his writings and nowhere else.
That seems like pretty strong evidence that he experienced it himself or got it in a very specific detail from his dad, I guess. But what a weird thing to be like, so Dad, tell me about the money. What was it made out of? What was the tax exchange rate?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to think if his father, if he got all the information from his father, even perhaps, and his uncle, but we're going to get into this, but he went somewhere. He wasn't in Italy. Marco knew stuff. He knew about the dress codes, the ceremonies that the Khan had put on, the way different ornate belts denoted rank, the specifics of how the Khan appeared. He knew that in the Khan's new city, Karakum, that there were to be trees planted outside of buildings to provide shade to travellers and to note where the road was when it snowed, how far these trees were to be planted apart. He in detail laid out the workings of salt production, and while not something that was unique to China, as salt was big business wherever there's seawater, he knew the specific way in which it was done in rural China.
I'm convinced. End of podcast?
Sweet.
Great. Thank you so much for presenting us with this information.
I think the thing that people couldn't accept is that
changed my mind now.
People couldn't accept the fact that Marco was treated well. Kubla Khan liked him, according to Marco's writings, and promoted him within his ranks and sent him away for 3 years to a remote part of the empire at one point, some people believe, to protect him. Essentially, he got caught walking the palace halls with a woman, which was a big deal and something you do not do. He got ratted out and had to be brought before the Khan for punishment, but he got away with it. You didn't normally get away with things. You normally got murdered.
If this is true, what did he do to make Kubla Khan like him so much?
I think he was just flattered by him. I think Kubla Khan seemed to like Marco Polo because Marco Polo, he even says in his book, and later on he says that he's not the main character of his book, Kubla Khan is. He seems to have revered him and thought he was just incredible. And flattery will get you a long way.
Yeah, I don't want to murder someone who tells me I'm great all the time, frankly.
Also, Paula, you look really lovely today.
Thank you so much. You've been spared.
Some people think that he was sent away as a punishment, but the other idea is that he was sent away so that other people in the court didn't kill him, essentially. Because there was jealousy in there. And he went to this new administrative position on horseback, which doesn't seem like a big deal in Western Europe, but horseback was reserved for nobles in the Mongol Empire. And the records do talk about a bolo being sent to do this, which is phonetically correct for the translation to polo. But nowhere, which is difficult to accept, nowhere are there words Marco Polo found in the records, though.
It was also interesting because if I'm going to lie about it and make a story, if I'm telling a tall tale about this, again, of course, it's the same thing where the people go, well, see, this is proof that this happened. And then the other people are going to be like, or if you're telling a tall tale, of course you're going to make yourself the loved foreign advisor or whatever to Kubla Khan. Of course that's part of the story because you're telling a tall tale. You're telling something fantastical. So is this going to be the whole thing where every bit of evidence makes me believe both things at one time?
I'm hoping so, yes.
Oh, gosh.
That's kind of the point.
Oh, no.
I think that's the thing that people really don't want to accept is that this guy, I mean, at his time, he's just some guy, right? Was able to rise above his station, essentially, in a foreign court.
In a scary court, too. Like,
Yes.
it's scary to think about. One, it's so far away. It's really unknown for the people of Europe, I would think, overall. And yeah, again, like we talked about before, the reputation of the Mongols. Like, why is this Yahoo able to become a revered member of this terrifying foreign regime?
Exactly. It's just so difficult to actually believe this story. But I say it right now, I do believe. But that's kind of my brand. Marco's father and uncle urge for them to finally head back to Venice. The
Right.
Khan being an old man at this point, Marco had been there for nearly 20 years. And the political climate had begun to become very uncertain. And those instincts were absolutely correct, as the Mongolian Empire is about to go through much the same as what happened to Alexander the Great's empire once he died, which is just this mad grab for power by all the factions, essentially. Luck would have it that 3 barons turn up asking for a princess for marriage to their leader, and the Polos use this as an opportunity to offer to escort her to the west of the kingdom.
Because they're like,
on
we
their
need to
way
get
home.
out of here because when the power vacuum happens, we may not survive it.
Exactly. And they use this as they're doing such a favor to the Khan, but also they're getting out, right?
Quickly, I feel like we kind of skipped over how Marco Polo got to China. So his dad and uncle were there, got sent back, promised to bring 100 priests back with them, saw their 15-year-old Marco Polo, gathered up some number of priests with Marco Polo and went back over. And then they stayed there for all this amount of time.
Well, they tried to grab some priests, but the priests made it like 20 days into the journey and went home.
And then pieced out. So they got
they
back
kind of
without the
returned-
priests. And
They returned sans le priest, if I'm honest.
that makes me nervous too, though, because Kubla Khan's like, go back and bring me some priests. And they show up and they're like, sorry, we don't have any priests. And he didn't just kill them. He was like, that's okay. It's been 3 years. You didn't show up with the thing I wanted, but that's all right. Have some honored positions in my court.
Well, in fact, the problem is that they had a celebration for the Polos when they returned. They kind of threw a bit of a party, a bit of a fanfare for them.
But they showed up empty-handed.
But they came back. I think that's cool.
Oh, yeah,
That's
that they
good,
actually
you know?
returned. That's true. Okay, so that's how Marco Polo got there, according to his story. And then he's been here and all these things, and now everyone's like, well, actually, maybe we should go now. We've been here a while. It's been how many years?
they thought-
20 years, you said?
About 20 years
Wow.
they've been there, yeah.
They were expats, basically.
Big time. The things that are strange about Marco Polo's account is more to do with what's not mentioned.
Okay.
He never talks about the different Chinese scripts, for instance, which would have been so different to what he would have seen before. He never mentions tea ceremonies, chopsticks, foot binding. He doesn't mention the printing press, which the printing press would be like going to another country and now everyone uses microchips in their brains and are hardwired into a floating AI. It would have been huge.
Huh.
But he does mention Chinese nautical inventions like watertight compartments and bulkheads, partitions in Chinese ships. And he's the first and most detailed in these descriptions anywhere in the West.
Maybe the other stuff he just didn't care about.
Exactly. I think that is
guess.
part of it. Well, the thing that a lot of people talk about is the fact that he never mentions the Great Wall of China, which you really would think would be pretty interesting.
You'd be like, whoa, and then on the way there, we saw this crazy big wall.
And everyone's like, well, he must not have done it because he doesn't mention the Great Wall of China. However, other explorers at that time also don't mention the Great Wall of China because The Great Wall of China was just a lump of like clay that was rotting away for hundreds of years at that point.
Really?
It was after this point that it really got built up again. In certain parts, I mean, there are parts of it that were fortified, but of course it's so long that it wasn't all in good nick the whole time, right? And there are some oddities surrounding his initial trek east, which we want to talk about a little bit.
Yeah.
From Kashgar, along the Silk Road, he travels to Dunhuang,
Okay.
which is where the singing desert that we spoke about at the start was. Spoiler, not demons. It's just vibrating windswept sand.
Or hear me out. Demons cause the wind to blow and vibrate the sand. Okay? You know what I mean?
If not demons, then how wind, I like to think.
There you go.
You know?
Yeah.
It would scare the bejesus out of him and everybody else, though.
Yeah.
Dunhuang at the time, though, was this incredible city and trade hub. It's where Buddhism was emanating from, with hundreds of caves built into the rock faces, all remarkably and ornately sculpted and adorned, but he never mentions it.
He's too distracted by the scary winds. He's like,
Well, the thing is-
there are ghosts here. I mean, I went out just actually before we started recording, I left my office, I did some things, I came back in, and I was like, the light's out in here. Did I turn that light out? I don't remember turning the light out. Is my house haunted? And that freaked me
Paula,
out.
we already know your house is haunted. It is haunted, big time, 100%.
If that tiny thing freaked me out and distracted me, and now I'm telling the story on a podcast, then
True.
howling winds that sound like voices singing in the desert,
It sounds quite relaxing.
it sounds horrifying. And yeah, that would take up my whole brain. I get that there's this idea that it's like, well, why didn't he talk about this if he saw it? But like, do we all just talk about everything we see all the time?
Yeah, but he was writing a book. But I do have some thoughts about this, which we'll get into. There's also this that for some reason they travel north to Karakoto, which is totally out of the way. There's no real explanation as to why he did this, but the Tanguts, to whom Karakoto was the capital, had been erased from the map decades before. Guess by who? The Mongols. But
our scary friends, the Mongols.
But I don't know. I mean, it took years to get to China. Maybe they heard of some opportunity up in Karakoto, or they escorted someone from a tribal war, meant they needed to go seek out a refuge or something. I don't know. It could be anything. There's thousands of excuses.
Is it possible they could have gotten lost and just ended up there?
That's unlikely that they would have just gotten lost, because it's basically like due north. But there's any number of reasons that they could have needed to go to Karakoto.
Matthew, they had a side quest, and they're completionists, okay? And a little exclamation point showed up on their map there, and like, we gotta go up there. We gotta check out this side quest. We can't skip it.
Otherwise, the marker's going to be pinging the rest of the game, and you know that's your fault.
It's gonna bug me, yeah.
I mean, he could have just been going there to see for himself what a city that had been destroyed by the Mongols looked like, to know what he was getting himself into.
I was gonna say, like, prepare yourself. We're going to visit some people. Let's see the destruction they cause.
I mean, looking at that type of destruction would be no different to us going to see what the aftermath of a natural disaster.
Yeah.
But then again, the thing is that if he wasn't in China this whole time, then why are there no records of him anywhere else? In Constantinople, in other parts of Europe, there's even less, it seems, to suggest that he was in Europe than Asia.
Yeah, because he was gone somewhere for 20 plus years.
Then where was he? If he wasn't away, then where was he? Where was he? I mean, his family had business in Constantinople, but surely there'll be records of a building that was rented to Marco Polo or owned by Marco Polo.
Especially if you're there on business, I think there would be records.
He's a merchant, exactly. At that time, no marriage records. He doesn't get married for 20 years, from the ages of like 15 to 35. He doesn't bother getting married. That's so unlikely.
Yeah.
His family sold their goods and turned them into gems to take away easily. Why would they do that, if not to travel with? But when he finally gets back, the Venetians, unfortunately, are at war with the Genovese. And this is a war that Marco joins in with. He arms this galley with a trebuchet and decides to sail it towards the war effort. But he gets captured and thrown in jail.
Hey, I've been gone for a while. But y'all are having a war? I'll dive in. Why not?
He was a bit of an adventurer. It's like, I'm in. Count me
He's like,
in.
let's
I can
do
sail the
this.
ship. Yeah, he gets captured by the Genovese and put in jail with his cellmate, a guy called Rustichello de Pisa.
Oh, Rusty.
Rusty, who was a romance author. And to pass the time, they wrote the travels of Marco Polo into a book. It's funny to me about Rustichello de Pisa, as the Pisans, as in the city of Pisa,
Right.
were on terrible terms with the Genovese as well, and the Tuscans at the time. I can just imagine this soldier comes into the tavern and he says, I'm arresting anyone from Pisa. You, what's your name? He goes, well,
Just call me old Rusty.
just old Rusty. Rusty over here.
That's what people call me, old Rusty Rust. That's it. No last name.
No last name. That's the same as the city name. Rusty, where you from? Not de Pisa.
Like, come with us.
The thing is that this pairing makes this book writing interesting, because one thing is that the travel book gets criticized for is that having two authors made the narrative clash at times. Marco wanted to write things matter of fact, with himself as a mere observer. He really believed that Kubla Khan was the main character. But Rustichello was a romance writer and often thrust Marco, probably in those words, into the position of protagonist. So perhaps some of the more exciting parts of the book are jazzed up a little bit. Perhaps some of the perils were even added to along the way. But the information in the book, to me, seems to be undeniable. He often gets criticized for the things he leaves out, but maybe Rustichello just thought the reader doesn't want another chapter on minutia.
Yeah, that's interesting point. Like maybe it was the information that got in was actually like a compromise. And Marco Polo's like, no, we need to talk about these trees that line the street. But also there were these caves, and Rusty's like, look, we can pick one.
Caves.
Trees or caves, pick one. Like, I don't need 3 pages of a song while Tom Bombadil comes in. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Exactly, right? Well, that's really what I think is the issue. There's all stuff about bridges where Marco's description of these bridges were absolutely fantastic, and all these different parts of his descriptions of things. And I think Rustichello is probably just saying things like, maybe there's like an offhanded comment that Marco makes about, I mean, this is all, just our speculation,
Yeah,
but offhanded comment of Marco saying, oh, and some of the tribal people there believe that the desert sings. And he says, oh, tell me about this singing desert. And all of a sudden, in the book, Marco Polo's at the singing desert. And also, there happens to be, because there's one part of the book where there's a raid on the party. They're all sleeping in tents and there's a raid and stuff. I don't think all the stuff in the book is true. I think a lot of the more exciting things are probably just Rustichello saying, we've got to put you in this position because the reader's not going to want to know.
yeah, well, the fiction writer's like, do you want people to read this or not? Do you want anyone to read it? If so, we need to put some adventure in it.
I mean, there's this whole thing about this Tibetan practice where the women in this one specific tribe were only valued as partners if they were very sexually experienced, rather than what the West was believing at the time, which was, of course, virgins is all anyone really wanted.
Yeah, you need to be as chaste as possible, right?
So this was like a sexy and salacious thing to get added in the book. I think Rustichello probably sexed this book up a bit.
Yeah.
One thing I struggle with is, and I think one thing that helps explain why some of the details might be wrong at times, is that a lot of the stuff he's describing in the book happened 25 years ago.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because if he's talking about his journey over to China, by the time he's back and in jail, yeah, that was a long time ago.
Maybe he didn't go to that town because he got the town name wrong and he went to a different town. I don't think he had his notes and his diaries with him. He did try, though, and the reason he was so good at remembering a lot of things was he tried to memorize things that he noticed in the Khan's empire. Because he noticed that the Khan would ask people what was going on, And he was very displeased when the emissaries came back and had no reports of their travels. The Khan wanted to know things. So
Interesting.
Marco, who revered and respected the Khan, may have wanted to give the best account he possibly could have to him, and so had to forcibly put all this stuff to memory.
That's really interesting. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, I need to remember all these details because I'm going to need to relay them back to Kubla Khan when I get back, because I know he's going to ask me. And then it gets stuck in your brain.
It's like there's this amazing bridge that's been built in this province. It's this long. It's got this many statues on. You'd be so proud of it.
Yeah.
You know, there's these people that work so hard in this town that I am the provincial tax collector in now. And they're using these traditional ways to make salt, but they're doing it so well.
He's like, and I don't need to tell him about this detail because he already knows that's there. So I'm remembering this detail. I feel like that makes sense. I don't know. I guess I see no reason to not believe that Marco Polo's book is based in fact.
I certainly think he went. But the people at the time thought his story was just too incredible to be believed. And maybe he did exaggerate things, but one thing is true, that is that on his deathbed, he remained true to his story, only adding that I told merely half of what I'd seen, otherwise no one would have believed me.
Thank you so much for watching this video about the journey of Marco Polo and whether or not it actually happened. I think Matthew and I both think it probably did. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. If you are interested in listening to this in its podcast form, you can do that. It is available in your podcatcher of choice. And of course, if you would please subscribe to the channel and like the video if you enjoyed what we're doing so that you can see more of our episodes, we'd love it if you could do that. Matthew, thank you so much for doing all the research on this episode and hosting it.
You're welcome.
Thanks everyone so much, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.